Then, of course, the user experience has been shitty forever, and it was obvious since forever that the user experience is shitty, and nobody really paid much attention to that. Everybody was always too busy, like, oh, this new shiny thing for the next cycle. So, well, the new shiny thing for the next cycle should actually be onboarding people, right, and making the user experience better, and making wallet drains harder and scams harder and all these things. Obviously, there is a plateau where the protection of the funds, the responsibility of that lies a lot on the user, but there's so much here you can get rid of before you get to that point where you can just mitigate a lot of those issues so that the experience as a whole would be safer for the user and it would be a better onboarding experience.
Okay, we're back. Kind of like a little bit of a detour on the highway that is generally what we do. Well, not really, but we haven't had Dan on for about 35 years. He's been busy. It's been a while. So for those who don't know, Dan is founder of Radix. He comes and goes out of his basement, but it seems like they've got him in the attic now. He's had an upgrade. Dan, it's good to see you, my friend. It's been a while.
Good to see you. Good to catch up.
Yeah, man. I mean, the last time we chatted, you were still kind of deploying in Babylon, and there were a whole lot of ideas and kind of like question marks, and it seems like those question marks have been answered, and I'm sure there's more question marks, but you guys have a working product now. It's been, 11 years? Tell us what's been happening.
Yeah. So my journey in crypto started a long time ago, for those that don't know. Some people call me an OG. Got involved in like 2012. Played around with Bitcoin first. Very interested in what Bitcoin could become. And then just had some concerns about the long term for Bitcoin. Scalability, probably the main one. You know, if you want to onboard billions of people, then it needs to scale. But then also, you know, like things like minor centralization and all this stuff, right? And initially my intention was to look at maybe solutions to build into Bitcoin for this. But then after a bit of friction with the Bitcoin community and backwards and forwards, it just became a bit obvious that, you know what, maybe it's just better to start from scratch and take a strong R&D perspective, move forward with that and see what comes out of it. And then, like 12 years later, here we are now. Radix has been up and live for approaching 3 years. The first drop of the network was just very basic, right? It was just simple transactions and a few things just to lay the foundation. And then Babylon was last year, which is kind of smart contracts, our custom built stack from the ground up, which just makes developing smart contracts a lot simpler, a lot easier, less prone to, bugs, wallet drains, they don't happen, all this kind of stuff. A large part of the R&D focus has been on scalability. We've kind of gone about it the opposite direction to most projects would, where, okay, we've got the scalability piece kind of figured out, but you don't really need that until you've got users and developers and adoption and volume and traction, right? And the friction points for them really are user experience, which has been terrible forever. And the developer experience is also shockingly bad, right? It's really easy to screw things up. It's difficult to code this stuff. The tooling's not good. You can make mistakes quite easily, especially if you've been doing a 12-hour coding slog to get something out the door. So we kind of pivoted focus to those areas first with the intent of, okay, we can focus on this now, get people through the door, get some traction, and then the scalability piece can just be running in the background and we can push that out over a number of network iterations. So it's a long journey and it's a long play, but we're doing it right. And I think that is what matters more than doing it quick, just to, capture market share, because the market share of crypto is still tiny, really, right? Everyone's fighting over 3 to 5% of the global pie. It's like, okay, you guys go fight with yourselves. We'll concentrate on capturing some of that 95% that's still waiting out there. So that's kind of our approach, right? Slow, steady, the old tale, the tortoise and the hare, right? We are the tortoise. We shall win. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, and I mean the reason why I wanted to chat to you, and also to kind of like shed some light for everyone that's listening, is that I think Dan and I feel the same way about kind of like where are we going? You know, like where are we primarily going? Not only from like a functional blockchain perspective, whether it's Radix, EVM in general, it doesn't matter. The point is that I think there's a bit of an ideology there, like in terms of what we'd like to see. Um, and I think we share the same kind of like perspective, is that it's, you know, it's a place where decentralization and self custody and all those good things can be imparted to individuals, and they can obviously realize a true sense of freedom. I mean, I know that sounds kind of like like out there, but that is the fundamental basis of this. It's not relying on a third party to take care of your financial well-being. It's not relying on somebody with keys to this kingdom, whatever that might look like, whether it's on Radix, whether it's on Ethereum. And then kind of like the leader of the pack has always been Bitcoin. Bitcoin was that possibility. And it's like, yeah, I mean, would you like to kind of expand and start there? And maybe I can just fill in.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, Bitcoin was created to remove middlemen, right? And Satoshi said this himself. Um, and the way that I've always seen cryptocurrency is not just the removal of middlemen and giving you back control over your own funds and your own self-sovereignty and your own identity and such, right? And controlling your data and all these things that it's become now. But it also represents a choice. It represents a choice that I can either remain in a fundamentally broken system, which is the fiat system, or I can choose to go elsewhere and I can try this new system, which has different properties. Or maybe I keep a foot in both, right? I keep a foot in fiat and I keep a foot in Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies or whatever. But it's that fundamental choice that we didn't have before 2008, right? There was no choice. It was just this fiat system controlled, no freedom, censorship, all this kind of stuff, right? And recently, over the past few years, especially over the last 4 years, since the last cycle, I really feel that a lot of those fundamental ideologies that spawned this industry as a whole have just been lost, completely lost. And we saw just last week RFK and Trump on the stage at a Bitcoin conference talking about how America is going to, buy up all this Bitcoin and all the rest of the remaining Bitcoin emission is going to be prioritized in America to be mined there and stuff. And it just kind of made me feel a bit sad, especially when there's all these people in the crowd cheering for it, right? And it's like, really, like, have we really lost the way that much that what makes you happy is the price of Bitcoin in respect to dollars increasing, and that's all you care about? Like, what about the other things that are important here? And I'm not completely against governments holding and partaking in cryptocurrency, right? Because it gives it credibility to citizens of that country if their government has some cryptocurrency on the treasury. And if the government is proactively involved in cryptocurrency and regulation and stuff. But this whole idea that the US is going to acquire a huge reserve of Bitcoin, and just not only does that just really grind up close against the fundamentals of what cryptocurrencies really stand for, but it also, the extreme edge of things, carries a ton of risk in terms of decentralization, right? Permissionlessness, control. Yeah. If in some scenarios, when you kind of think about this, seriously think about it, then essentially what could happen is a domino effect where Bitcoin and potentially other cryptocurrencies are just controlled by governments of the world. not necessarily because they are malevolent to crypto, but because they have to protect their own interests in terms of the reserves that they hold, right? If those reserves are in the trillions, then they will want to protect an investment of trillions of dollars or pounds or whatever it is in that reserve, right? And so the only way they can really exercise control and protection of those reserves is if they control the network in which it resides. And so I really fear that if countries follow suit with the US in terms of holding large reserves and mining or staking or whatever the civil mechanism is in order to secure the network so that those reserves are safe, then these entities have such huge amounts of resources that they can secure the network to such a degree for their own interests that small players like mining farms and us with GPUs and small amounts of stake, we can still participate, sure, but the influence that participation brings is essentially zero, right? Like, for example, if the US holds a large amount of Bitcoin, the US will want to ensure that the Bitcoin network is strong against attacks, right? So if I was the US government and I had a few $1 trillion in Bitcoin, then my next step would be, okay, let's throw some hash power at the network so that double spend attacks and long range rollbacks and all these things much more difficult to happen, right? So as the US, I start to deploy this hash power, and as a consequence of that, of course, I will get some emission, right? Because the US government mining machines will produce some blocks and get the block rewards. Great, okay, cool, whatever. So the US government is buying up all this hash power to secure the network, i.e. their treasury investment. And they buy a lot of it. But then say there are some other countries that also follow suit, right? And have some reserves of Bitcoin. And they see the US is 20%, 25%, 30% maybe hash power, right? Or maybe even more, who knows, right? Is that country going to be happy to let the US be in such a significant position of influence of the network when they themselves maybe hold hundreds of billions or maybe even trillions of Bitcoin themselves? No, of course not. They're going to take the same approach, right? It's like, well, the US is okay, we have a good relationship, but I would like some peace of mind just in case something happens to the US. So I'm going to throw some hash power in there too. And then they start to do it. And they buy 10, 15% worth of compute so they can have a good amount of hash power influence. And then another country sees the same thing going on. Yeah, well, these two guys, they're okay, they're my buddies, but I don't want to trust them implicitly, so I'm going to throw some. And then before you know it, the hash power in the network has just exploded to the point where the governments that hold this on their treasury, they're all protecting themselves and each other from everybody else, right? Great. They're all secure, they're happy, their investments are protected. But we're just priced out of that hash race, right? Because it will be, exahashes at that point, right? Like the biggest mining farms will be small fry in the worst case, right? Because they will want to protect their investment and their self-interests. And so then it just becomes centralized essentially.
Yeah, so there's two ways that you can obviously look at this from my perspective, is that you've always had kind of like this race for kind of like the information age / war, like there's the information war that's currently happening, and it's probably happening on levels that we'll never understand, but it's definitely a big thing, and it's part of kind of like government strategy and the rest of it, and this definitely potentially falls into that, because ultimately Bitcoin is the most secure network that human beings have ever created. And you're right, this essentially jeopardizes the very essence of that, and then essentially the very essence of decentralization, and essentially Bitcoin then becomes something completely different. But what my concern is that, and I'm not sure whether you've thought about this, but kind of what are the iterations from a kind of like an information / electronic warfare scenario where you've got all those trillions of dollars that are inherently valued within this network, and now the network is being exploited in order to wage that electronic / information war, because then it becomes no longer a case of a store of value. It becomes a the opposite of what it was built to do, and then it becomes this tool for warfare and all that kind of stuff. I mean, is that kind of like, am I being unreasonable in that thinking? Or
No,
is it...
because like, let's say that hypothetical scenario plays out, right? And so you've got governments of the world that have hash power. And in the Bitcoin network, especially, if you have hash power, then you have influence and control, right? So the next block, whoever mines that block, essentially has the right to dictate what happens next, right? So if you're a government, then and all of your buddies are also involved, and between you, all of the government agencies, all the nation states, or majority of on the planet, between them, if they control a super majority of the hash power, then they can choose to censor transactions, right? It's like, okay, well, we're not going to include this in any blocks. And if they dominate mining between them, then you have a mining cabal almost, right? Yeah, we're not going to include transactions from this. We're not going to include transactions from there. If somebody wants to send 100,000 Bitcoin to Binance, then we're going to block that transaction because that's potentially a sell event and we're protecting our treasury and blah, 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 right? So just because the network underneath is built to be decentralized, that doesn't mean it can't centralize, right? And it doesn't mean that it will remain permissionless. And it doesn't mean any of those things, because those things, and essentially, they are somewhat fragile, right? If somebody with the wrong intention and enough resource comes along, then you can break those things because they're not set in stone, because they're impossible to guarantee in all circumstances. And so you could have this, as you put it, warfare, right? And then they could do the same with Ethereum, for example. If they put in Ethereum on their treasury and then staking that treasury, like you imagine, like $5 trillion, $6 trillion, $10 trillion of Ethereum in treasuries, and then all that gets staked, right? It's a lot of influence that you're going to have on the Ethereum network there. So you can do similar kinds of things. And so while I'm somewhat pro governments being involved proactively in holding some on treasury and, being involved kind of at the infrastructure level, enabling payments within that nation, or even legal tender to pay taxes and things, right? That kind of stuff. That's great, because it gives the citizens a choice and it expands that choice. Okay, I can pay here for this thing. I can pay my taxes in Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever. But the government taking this kind of position in a big way, that's the complete anti of what this is supposed to be for, right? This is all supposed to be to separate money from state. But if the state controls the majority of this money, then you haven't really separated the two, and you're just back to essentially fiat and fiat control. And in some cases as well, I haven't really thought this all the way through, but if the US, for example, is holding millions of Bitcoin, and their reason for doing so is to kind of compensate the US debt in terms of, it's whatever it is, $35 trillion or whatever, right? But they have such a large position within Bitcoin and, their kind of mining operation, then you essentially get leakage of US monetary policy into the Bitcoin ecosystem, right? Because the US then needs Bitcoin to do something in order to facilitate some outcome they want in terms of that fiscal debt they have. Then whatever policy they apply to achieve that, they can import that into the Bitcoin economy because they hold such a significant amount of it, right? They have such an amount of mining hash power. So you potentially start to get leakage of fiscal policy from nation states, which we can't do anything about because nobody has the funds to compete with that kind of hash power or with that level of state that they hold. Because the biggest problem with this is that the US can just print as many dollars as it needs to buy as many Bitcoin as it wants to. That's ultimately, right? It has unlimited resources to do that.
So, I mean, without wanting to sound like a doomer and a gloomer, I mean, it was obvious and inevitable, or was it? But it seems like it was. So Where do we go from here? So let's say, for example, we are kind of like this worst case scenario is that we are right. What is the way forward here? Is it kind of like, well, it was maybe partly a successful experiment and partly a failure, and we've learned what we needed to learn so that we can transcend it and move forward? But this thing is in motion now, and things are happening. And is it just a case of, well, this is one scenario that could play out, let's hope that it doesn't? Or is there a different course of action that could and maybe even needs to be taken?
I think it's partly a failure for a number of reasons. I mean, crypto didn't grow quick enough, for one, right? And it didn't grow quick enough because of some of our own choices as an industry that we made, because of some events that were somewhat catastrophic, that if they didn't happen, we would probably be in a better shape. But I always felt that this industry, because it was so disruptive, and and not so much disruptive to just another industry, but so disruptive in terms of like governments and stuff too, right?
Yes,
because it was so disruptive,
yeah.
I always felt like this needs to go off with a bang and gain traction really quickly, so it gets to the point where it's too big to fight, right? And that didn't happen, and it didn't happen because of Silk Road and Mt. Gox and FTX and Luna and all these other things, all these other bad things that happened, right? And we ended up as an industry with a reputation of scammers, Wild West, yeah. And so normal people on the street kind of just avoided. It sounds dodgy. I'm just going to leave my money in the bank, right? And then you got all the media rhetoric about everything crypto and all these things. We got a bad reputation very quickly, so that didn't help. Then, of course, the user experience has been shitty forever, and it was obvious since forever that the user experience is shitty, and nobody really paid much attention to that. Everybody was always too busy, like, this new shiny thing for the next cycle. So, well, the new shiny thing for the next cycle should actually be onboarding people, right, and making the user experience better, and making wallet drains harder and scams harder and all these things. Obviously, there is a plateau where the protection of the funds, the responsibility of that lies a lot on the user, but there's so much here you can get rid of before you get to that point where you can just mitigate a lot of those issues so that the experience as a whole would be safer for the user and it would be a better onboarding experience. Nobody really cared about any of that until, a couple of years ago. I mean, it's something we've been looking at for 6 years, at least as long as that, since Albert, who you mentioned earlier on, since he was with us, right? A long time we've been thinking about all this stuff. And then the whole kind of block size debate with Bitcoin just killed Bitcoin as ever being mass adopted in the way that Satoshi thought that it would, because that block size limit of 1 megabyte was only ever meant to be temporary, right? To ward off spam and DDoS attacks and things when the network was young, back in like 2010 and stuff. Yeah, it was never meant to be permanent. But then, the greedy powers that be, who were the majority in Bitcoin at the time, decided not to, because short and medium term gains, in their opinion, were better than long term. But the problem now is that's caused all manner of different issues, such as not just the onboarding, but also this massive elephant in the room regarding the Bitcoin security budget. Bitcoin actually gets cheaper over time in terms of logistics and like outlay, in terms of market cap, right? The ratio of how much I need to attack in terms of market cap gets cheaper over time because of the halvings. Now, Satoshi's idea was that over a long enough time period, 10, 20 years, that Bitcoin will be adopted to such a degree where the fees from transactions would compensate for the emission halving, right? So your security budget would remain healthy. And by security budget, I mean the amount of rewards that a miner gets for every block, needs to grow. It needs to grow over the long term. Otherwise, you essentially have a reducing security budget. And if the security budget is reducing, then the ratio to cost to attack versus market cap also reduces, right? And that's very unhealthy, because that means that I could buy a ton of Bitcoin now and just sit on it for a couple of cycles, and it's cheaper for me to attack the network Bitcoin with in 2 cycles than it is today, because the value of that Bitcoin that I buy today will have appreciated, right? So then I can sell that Bitcoin, buy mining hardware, will do whatever I want to do, right? Now that wouldn't have happened, in my opinion, if the block size would have been increased, like periodically. Yeah, every halving, then we will increase the block size 2x or something, right? So there is that capacity for the fees to be collected. But the problem is that Bitcoin can't collect enough fees now in order to make up for that security budget deficit, because you can only pack so many transactions in a block. And so if you can only pack so many transactions in a block, the only thing that can go up is the actual fees, right? But there comes a point where the actual fees are so high that people think, screw this, I'm going to go and use a different chain, right? It's much cheaper over there. I don't want to pay $100 per Bitcoin transaction when I can go over Ethereum or Solana or whatever and do it for $1 or even cents on the dollar, right?
Yeah.
So the ability for Bitcoin to capture activity, volume, transaction volume is gone too, because it's gone to other places. There was plenty there. There was always plenty there, but it's gone to other places. And so Bitcoin, even without institutions and banks and governments stepping in into these large positions, it's already somewhat vulnerable over the very long term, because what happens when the block reward is tiny and your security budget is then only a small fraction of what the market cap is. Potentially then you have a real problem, and that could have been avoided.
Just in terms of just something that I'm not clear on. So, for example, we're seeing kind of like the birth, or more, not necessarily the birth, but the kind of like the realization of a Bitcoin DeFi, not narrative, but a real practical kind of application around not necessarily L2s, but kind of sidechains that obviously allow for the security of Bitcoin and the functionality of smart contracts and EVM to kind of like be synergistically combined and used for the better of both. Now, isn't the hash power that is being essentially prescribed to those sidechains and to allow those ecosystems to function in a decentralized way actually contributing to the functionality and, more importantly, the fees going to miners? Isn't that a net positive for miners going forward, potentially?
Depends, right? So the hash power on those side chains doesn't really contribute to Bitcoin security in terms of hash power, right? Because unless they're doing tricks like merge mining, which I don't know if they are, in terms of the fees, so these kind of side chains or L2s or whatever, they will have potentially their own fee schedule, right, to pay for the operation of that network. And then when they want to settle back to the Bitcoin network, whatever changes happened, then there will be a fee for that transaction, right? But say in this L2 or this side chain, 1 million transactions happened in there, the fees for those transactions doesn't make it back to the Bitcoin network, because they're only sending a single transaction back, which updates the state, right? So there's only a single fee for that. So, if it's like a roll-up of some kind or something, right? That roll-up just says, okay, this is what the state was, and this is what it now is, and that's a single transaction, right? So it doesn't really help in terms of fees for the security budget, because it's only a single transaction. Of course, they could choose to overpay the fee as a gesture of goodwill, but that never happens, right? It's like, no, we're going to keep as much of the profit to ourselves and just pay the minimum we have to get that transaction through as quickly as possible. So, all of those transactions that happen, and I've heard this argument before as well, not just Bitcoin, but Ethereum and other L2 layers, where the argument is made that the L2 is healthy for the L1. And it's like, how is it, right? Like, you're fracturing liquidity, you're fracturing security, you're fracturing fees, all these things, right? The only thing that makes it back to the L1 is that single transaction when you want to update the state, and that doesn't give you anything. And then you can take it even further and say that the security of the L1 means nothing because the L1 doesn't know what this transaction means, right? And in the guise of I'm pushing a roll up onto Ethereum, for example, right, or zero knowledge proof or whatever, if something happens in an L2, but unless that L1 knows how to interpret all of these zero knowledge proofs and roll-ups, and there's so many of them now, right? There's like hundreds of different protocols, all different L2s, different primitives they use, different formats, different keys, different hash, different everything. Unless that L2 knows how, that L1 knows how to interpret and verify and perform the same execution, it doesn't mean anything. The security that the L2, that the L1 has doesn't mean anything because it can't actually verify what happened. It's just blind accepting, okay, you say this happens, cool. I put all my security behind what you've said has happened. I can't verify it myself, right? So L2s themselves also have this kind of security fallacy, I guess.
Okay, so
we're getting deep in the weeds here.
Yeah, I know we are, and it's. I think it's really important because, just coming back to kind of like the original kind of like mission here, and I keep going back to this, even though I'm by no stretch of the imagination kind of like in the category of a Bitcoin maxi, even though I probably am more of a Bitcoin maxi than most of them. Because of obviously the reaction that I had over the weekend, but I keep on going back to the Genesis block and why did this all happen? Like, what was the motivation behind?
I made a tweet about this a few days ago, right? Like how it started with the picture of the Times, and then how it's going with a picture of the Bitcoin conference with, was it Trump or somebody else on the stage? And it's just like, why are we so happy about this? I mean, okay, yeah, be happy about it, right? Because one of the good things that could come out, of course, is finally some proper direction in terms of regulation, in the US, which has been an absolute nightmare. Regardless of all the fundamentals, it's just been an absolute nightmare. But why are we so happy that essentially the US is saying it's going to take control? And I saw a tweet today with somebody saying that the US has to be the home of Bitcoin. Let's bring it home. And it's like, what are you talking about? The home of the point of this stuff was that it didn't have a damn home, right? Yeah. Like that was what made it so special. There was no home. There was nobody in charge or in control. Yeah. We were in control. Us, people who don't already have self-sovereignty, right? People who already don't have control over their own wealth and their means and all this kind of stuff. People who are already locked out of that system, can't get a bank account or credit or all this stuff, right? We meant for that group of people, I mean, pardon my French, but it does fuck me off sometimes.
So I want to actually like look at kind of like the fundamentals of this thing, and then let's see whether we can arrive at a more positive place, because I think we both are quite frustrated and in many ways like angry, and it's like, okay, well, so we had the creation of this thing, Chancellor on the brink of second bailout for banks. Let's avoid, kind of like the state married to money and them calling the shots. And now we're seeing effectively not only a repeat of it, but actually the entrenchment of the very idea that would separate the two is now being taken away. Yeah. So that's the worst case scenario. And in many ways, we could argue till the cows come home that that's actually what is playing out. And it's a sad story. And maybe we need to look at other options. And that's another conversation. So I want to just bring it more kind of like to, what could be, the alternative that could land up being a net positive. And I'm just curious whether you've thought about it. I've been too frustrated to go too far down that road, but I'm sure there must be kind of like, the celebration thereof. And it's like, what does the scenario look like? And like, what is the middle of the road to the best case scenario that could come out of what we've seen now? Regulation obviously is one of them. What else?
Yeah, yeah. So regulation is one positive thing, right, which is much needed, and not just in the US, right? There's other jurisdictions too where the kind of regulatory frameworks are still very grey. So if the US takes a lead in that and defines very clearly, what was it Trump said, within 100 days or something, that was what he pledged. If Trump wins and the US has a very clear regulatory framework in 100 days, that's great, right? And then other jurisdictions can use that as a template for their own frameworks, right? So there's somewhat a bit of, say, maybe a standard, yeah. So across UK, Europe, etc., etc. That's a really good outcome, right? Because then it becomes very clear, and all those grey areas hopefully go away, and that will definitely, to some degree, it will annoy the anarchists and the idealists, but the realists, it will allow them to actually move forward with whatever kind of crypto ideas they had with some clarity, right? Okay, I can definitely do this. I can build this business. I can build this product. I know exactly what I'm going to do here, along from a legal perspective along the way. That would be really good, right? Second thing that's really good is the U.S. government getting involved in such a way with the regulation and holding some treasury. That's fine. That sends a clear signal to the citizens of the US, right? Okay, this is okay for us to have now. We've heard all these horror stories, but if old Sam is getting involved, then it can't be that bad anymore, right? So okay, I'm going to diversify some of my savings or pension or whatever, right? I'm going to diversify a little bit. Great, that's obviously a big win, yeah. Another step you could have is that retailers and stuff start to accept cryptocurrency in the US more broadly, and maybe stable coins as well. It doesn't really matter if it's a stable coin or if it's Bitcoin or Ethereum. It's just that adoption, right? Getting used to doing that stuff and having these tokens on their phone and a wallet. And if the US sticks with the whole kind of self custody is fine, that's even better. Yeah, great. So there's definitely a catalyst here where you can have a huge rollout of this technology being used in the US, and then all the countries will follow suit as well. Like whatever the US does, the world does, right? So other countries that have been kind of on the fence or a bit apprehensive, they'll start to follow too. So you just continually start getting this wave of adoption, and all that's fine. And it's just that last piece of the big treasury getting involved in mining or staking or whatever. That's just the piece that gives me the heebie-jeebies because I when you just see something so clearly, and it's like, why is this just not fucking obvious to everybody else, right? Am I the odd one out here? Am I the stupid one? Am I the smooth brain? Like, it's just so clear, and it's just a scary spiral. But take that out, everything else is like, yeah, that's great, cool, let's do it. Let's push on.
So what's really interesting about the scary part of this thing, and it's like this, and I've seen it kind of like in my life where like you get people that are amazing, like you meet people, they're great, and then as soon as there's the money element gets introduced into the equation, someone who is like an amazing human being, like on all levels, literally loses the plot when
become irrational.
Completely irrational, but on a level that is even beyond irrational. Like I've seen it with my own two eyes where there is no rhyme or reason, and it's very clear, and it's like, but it's not clear to them. And I think this is almost the same thing, but it's kind of like the mob mentality where we're in it together, which is obviously one of the most important kind of elements at the very core of what Bitcoin does, is this, like, it truly does provide you with this ideology of freedom, and it obviously, it reveals itself in many ways, and that's why it's such an interesting thing to study, and how we've evolved, and how we can, like, all the positives that you just spoke about, and how it's really powerful in that regard. Like, it is property, and it is rare, and it is so many things, but then what it also does is that it really does test the resolve of human nature around greed and around pushing things further, and not necessarily just from a monetary perspective, but on all fronts: technological, psychological, spiritual. I mean, there's so many discussions that have happened over the years. We've seen the podcasts, we've been down that road. So with that comes the responsibility of knowing that I'm being greedy right now, and the only thing that's motivating me is number go up, and I'm losing sight of what is actually going on, and more importantly, that I'm a part of this potential problem and stepping away from it. When you've got a very intelligent human being who's a fucking rocket scientist who's talking about millions of dollars per Bitcoin in value. Dude, you just valued Bitcoin in dollars, yet you are one of the biggest Bitcoin holders
Yeah,
on the planet,
that
yet
stuff drives me
you
insane
are
as well.
valuing Bitcoin
It's
in
like,
dollars.
it's going to be $45 million a coin. So, okay, how? How is it? How is it going to be $45 million a coin? Because you multiply that by 21 million, and you're into the like hundreds of quadrillions of dollars of market cap, right?
Yes,
there isn't that much money in the world when you take into account broad money, narrow money, derivatives, property, everything, right? Where is that coming from? Just stop talking shit for engagement, or like why? Like, just be realistic about how economies work. Surely you must know that that isn't sustainable in any way, right?
No.
I mean,
So I
I
think
feel like there's a bit of facts in there about that. I mean, we could go on for 3 hours. I'm sure we could.
But that's the essence of where this is right now. And I think it's important that there is a moment of self-reflection for everyone. I mean, this is why we're having this discussion. It's kind of like, well, maybe we aren't completely wrong. Maybe there is a lot of truth in what we're saying. Okay, so what is the truth? Determine what that is and take a good, long, hard look at, like, where is the potential problem here? We've just identified probably.
Is that 95% of the population don't self-reflect until shit's gone south. Then they stop and go, oh, what happened? Oh, I should have seen that coming. Yeah, especially when you've got other people telling you it's coming, and you just call them. I was called an idiot, God knows how many times last week when I was posting around, on the socials and stuff, and wrote those articles and was spreading them around, just trying to get people to just wake up a little bit. No, you're an idiot. Well, what do you know about anything? It's like, oh, I've been around a lot longer than you, so probably a bit more, right?
Yeah.
It's like, if I'm wrong, fine, I'm wrong. Yeah, and I'll say, okay, my bad, I was wrong. But it just, like, facts, right? Math, a lot of this stuff you can just run the numbers on. It's like, it doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah.
So I
think the collective conscious and unconscious on this thing, it's quite interesting, and it's another discussion in itself. And I always wondered, like, for a long time, like, how is it possible that there can be podcasts that are dedicated entirely to Bitcoin and they land up discussing the same things over and over again, but on different levels? And then I realized, when I started thinking about this, I think probably in the last 12 months, because I originally said, and obviously I got completely flamed for saying it, is I said, I think that a Bitcoin ETF will end up being a net positive for my bags in the long run, but it will be a net negative for the principle of Bitcoin.
Agreed.
And obviously I was told that I was being a bear at the time, which I was quite bearish during the bear market, because that's what you are. But I think there is truth in light of what's been happening. I mean, Trump's using it as a political weapon, and so he should. I mean, he wants to win, and I totally don't blame him for that. But I don't think he's genuine, and I don't think that if anyone thinks he is being genuine, then I think you're naive.
It does taste a little bit like pandering.
Yeah.
Right? He's
absolutely
found an audience where there's a lot of passion, and if you kind of put the Bitcoin issue and crypto issue in front of them, they essentially become single issue voters, right? Because they're so passionate about it, because number go up, Lambo, whatever, right? Memes, whatever, right? And so I do feel like there's definitely some pandering there. Because Trump was very critical about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, only 4 years ago, right? Okay. Has he been educated? He's allowed to change his mind if he has, right? Education is key. Everybody's allowed to change their mind when they have new information and they're educated properly. All right, cool. Maybe that's a piece of it. But I mean, I think there is a lot of pandering going on here, because what, 30, how many holders of crypto are there in America? 30 million? 20, 30 million people? It's a lot of votes.
In America apparently there's around 40 million people. That's
40 million people, right? So if you can motivate 90% of those people to go out and vote,
you
right?
win.
It's 35 million votes. Yeah, that's a lot of the votes. You know, it's a large portion of the vote turnout just there, banging crypto bros. And he's probably figured out, you know, crypto guys are motivated, so, and ladies, of course. So the chances are that if he can convince them, then 95% of them probably are going to get up and they probably are going to go and vote, right? Because by voting, it means number go up.
And the interesting thing is, from a US political perspective, is that, you know, it's not what they say, it's what they do. And there's no denying that, you know, the Biden administration has played a net negative in what's played out in crypto, you know, and I think that just also adds fuel to the fire. I mean, repeating on 2 occasions during his very loose-lipped speech about firing Gensler, didn't got the reaction he wanted and loved it and did it again, you know, twice.
Yeah. I mean, that's
so I mean, therein lies kind of like where his motivation is, and that's fine. There's a game that's being played, and he must play it, and you know, he wants to win, and so be it. But I think there is obviously this risk that you spoke about earlier on, and I'm just curious now.
Another risk as well, though, right? So let's just assume that, you know, Trump is genuine, right? So it's not just pandering or whatever. It's legit. Yeah. Okay. Cool. It's legit. So he comes into office and he does all these things, and it's great for crypto, and begrudgingly the US is buying treasury and whatever it's doing. All right, fine. All that stuff's happening. Yeah. But Trump's only in office for 4 years. What happens after 4 years? What if the next administration is crypto unfriendly again? But then they're sitting on this huge amount of influence, stash, mining power, all this stuff, right? Then what happens? What happens at that point? Oh, Trojan horse, was it? Maybe not intended to be, but the next administration that comes in, if they're crypto unfriendly, we're like, okay, boys, we can really rattle this shit now. I mean, no one's thinking long term, right?
Yeah, and we have to think long term. I mean, that's why you did what you did. That's why you said, well, how are we going to do this better? Like, how are we going to scale it?
My curse thinking long term.
Well, the thing is, though, that this is where I think the fundamental flaw lies in the current paradigm that is crypto, is that it is so short term motivated and orientated on a psych level, you know, like everyone just thinks, and whether they're aware of it or not isn't important. The deeds speak louder than words. It's all about short-term gains. What can I get out of it? And then
the next cycle. Where's the next bull? Okay, how long is that going to last? Okay, next bear. Okay, how long is that going to last? Okay, next bull. Yay, how long is that going to last? Oh, next bear. Boo, how long is that going to last? That's it. To your thought process at best, right? Well, but most people are just thinking about next week. You know, aping into some meme coin on Radium or somewhere. And okay, I'm going to make 100x next week. No, you're not. And even if you do, why is that good for this industry as a whole, right? Because your 100x means that somebody's lost money, right? Or
it's very different. It's very different when you work in the space and you trying to nurture something. Like, that's the one thing that I obviously like, owning a business and, you know, like caring about a business. Right? It's a very different thing, right? And like, I think a lot of people try and look at the long term, but a lot of them don't succeed because what they don't realize is that they're too caught up in the short term process where they don't actually look at what can I do that's positive for the long term, and then start like you do, you know, the freaking like Alice in Wonderland, where do I start? Well, you start at the beginning, you know, kind of thing. And people aren't prepared to do that. And I think that's the reason why we're here. And like you said, the reason why this industry didn't grow at the pace that it should have grown in order to have that critical mass momentum, I believe part of it is because of the short-term mindset.
Yeah, it is as well. Yeah. But that's also been brought on by ourselves in terms of an industry because, you know, early on, people made high returns in Bitcoin and Ethereum and other stuff, yeah, and that was essentially celebrated. And you see influencers with arms full of Rolexes and Lamborghinis and Ferraris and all this kind of lavish lifestyle stuff, and so that kind of became the culture, right? You got all these TikTokers and these influencers. It's just fuck off. But that's the culture, right? It really pissed me off, dude. Honestly, it's just like you don't know shit.
It's not real life, dude. Like it just doesn't matter how much money you've got. That just isn't real life.
You know what pisses me off about the most? You've really got me on that one, or maybe I've walked myself into it. You know what really pisses me off the most about these kind of people is that they will take a look at a project that's got strong tech fundamentals. Somebody's working hard, grinding it out for weeks, months, years on end. And they'll just look at the chart and shit all over it.
Correct.
It's like, how fucking dare you do that, right? While you're posing with your Rolex in your rented mansion that you don't really own because you're just engaging for likes. Like just crapping over somebody's hard work who is in this for the right reasons, right? Trying to make something better. For you to come along, influence it. Just do one.
In many ways, and I'll probably get a whole lot of flack for saying this, but in many ways, I actually preferred the bear market. I really did. Like, I connected a lot more meaningful with people. I had more time to actually get stuff done in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
And there was a lot more kind of like these kind of discussions happening where there's a lot of people in this industry that actually give a shit about where it's going. Like, I'd like to think I am, and you definitely are. And you just saw more of that. And now, even though the irony of it is that there are still pretty much the majority of people around are crypto natives anyways that were around in the bear market. It's this whole like dark side that comes out, and they're not really interested in anything else except those short-term gains, which is fine. They're entitled to do that. I'm not going to bother getting angry about it, because you know what? That's cool. You can do that. But I think it's our responsibility as people who do care about the long-term kind of like vision for this space and where we would like to see it. Like, we need to also maybe put our foot down and say, well, you know what? I'm calling you out for being a fucking LARP, and you need to stop behaving this way. And just, you know what, bro? Just stop typing. You've made a whole lot of money. Just stop typing and go to the Caribbean and spend some time on a beach.
Yeah.
Because you're talking shit now.
Like you say, right? So, like, individuals who are just, self-interested, fine, right? Okay, yeah, it happens, right? You've got to look after yourself. Where it grinds my gears is when it's people who have been around for a long time in influential positions that project just that mindset, right? Like, they've been around for long enough so that they would have at least tasted that whole kind of, the fundamentals we were talking about, right? They would have known about them. They would have tasted them. They would have felt the energy around them, right? Like, I actually really miss 2013, 2014, right? Because that's kind of when I guess the anarchy of the space became its peak, yeah? And it was crazy, right? Like in no way do I kind of, I agree with, burning down governments and all this kind of stuff, right? Governments do have their place. Banks have their place. Yeah, all of these entities have their place. But what I miss about that time is that the energy that people had on moving the space forward in the right way, right? Freedoms and self-sovereignty and all those things, right? Choice. Yeah, sure, price was in the background a little bit because things had started to get moving, but that was like the side story. Yeah. It was still very much about how do we make this better? How do we make the world better? Freedom, blah, 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 all that stuff, yeah? And it was absolutely crazy because it was all idealism and no realism. But it did push the space along quite a lot, yeah? Like, because some really cool stuff came out of that time period. But then somewhere along the way, things went wrong or sideways or whatever, and it flipped where that idea of pushing things along to a better place is now the side story. And the money is the main character, and people who push that money character that were here back in that day, I've got no time for those people at all, because it's just that they are serving their own self-interest by having the influence that they have to still drive this price go up, charts, Lambo, whatever. It's just like you should have more you've got more responsibility than that, and you just yeah. you know you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so I mean, just to close it off, because I know that you said that you only had an hour, and we could quite easily do a second and third part to this. And maybe we should, invite some people around. So if you have any ideas, let's do that.
Sure.
Because I think it's a very important topic, and the topics that follow from this. But just closing it off, I think it's like, is it really like a case of going out there and continuing to create an awareness? Because that's the way I feel. Like, I want to kind of go against the grain and say, like, guys, like, this isn't actually what we had originally subscribed for. Just be aware of it. Don't so that's my take on it. I'm not sure like what else there is. I mean, what are your thoughts around that?
I don't think there's much more that you could do, right? Like, it is just going out there and bringing up these points, and at the least people who are new, like coming into this space now or recently over the past couple of years, so that they can hear it as well, right? Because I guarantee nobody's telling them this story anywhere else. Yeah, so it's me, you, and some other people, the minority that are now kind of preaching, I guess, or at least trying to remind everybody about what this was really for. Yeah, money's fine, okay, but these were the principles. Yeah, can we at least try and stick to them to some degree instead of just all this, what we've got right now? And so I think that we should keep advocating that, and at least making people aware of it, so that they can hopefully carry the torch as well, and they can go out and say, actually, you know what, this crypto thing is more than just 100x's. It's actually all of this as well, which is really cool, and educate and stuff. But I think that unless you've got extremely thick skin doing that at this point in time with a bull market coming up, you got to be ready to get flamed and punched and all kinds of stuff, which is fine. I don't care, whatever, you can come at me. I've got my opinion, and my opinion is my opinion. And if you want to listen, great. If you don't, whatever, you call me an idiot all you like. I don't give a shit. But some people aren't quite as carefree, let's say. So I think it's a hard job to do that now. But I'm not going to quit, and I'm sure you aren't either, right?
No, I'm not, because like I said, I mean, I'm here for the long haul. I'm honestly not interested in taking a backhander so that I can shill something that is completely and utterly against everything that I stand for just because I'm making a whole lot of money. That's just not what I'm going to do. No. I think I can do much better by being here, enjoying what I'm doing, having these kind of discussions, and growing in the space. Whether that sounds easy to you, that's fine. You're entitled to your opinion. But I'm here for the long haul. I've been here for a while, and I enjoy it. I think most of the time I have a smile on my face, even when I'm working freaking hard. And
me too. Yeah, most of the time. It's an enjoyable space to be, right? Because there are a lot of smart people making cool shit. And
well, you taught me something about this space. You said to me, I've never met somebody who's entered this space with the seriousness about the space and then leave. Like the clever people who discover this space and they find their groove in it never leave.
Yeah, it's like a drug.
And like you told me that 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget that. That's what you said to me. And I was like, that's an interesting comment. And then I obviously tested that.
You've grown into the comment.
I've grown into, but I've recognized it in all these people that I've encountered along the way. And it's so bang on every single one of them, man. Like big brain, like lawyer, freaking, like professor this
deep.
and that. And
they
get in it and they just they throw that life away and they're like, I'm in, dude, and I'm doing this. And it's like, I mean, I interviewed a dude the other day, Berkeley graduate in finance, like proper bright dude, and now he's set up a DEX on base. And you can see the guy's on a mission, and money's obviously an important part of it, but that's not why he's there. It's like I'm on a mission, bro, and this is what it is, and it's very clear.
Yeah.
And that's proper. And that's what's so beautiful about this space. And that's what we should be encouraging, and we need more of that. Not I will need my fix. And I mean, it's fun. I'm guilty as charged in many ways, but that's not what it's about at the end of the day. It's a small part of it.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. Because if it wasn't, then I must be insane for sticking around this long, right?
No, you're the bona fide complete. You're the head of the mental asylum, bro. You got the fucking corner office with the 50th floor view.
I mean, you know, like my skin isn't thick anymore. It's granite after over a decade dealing with all this day in, day out, 18 hours a day, 7 days a week most of the time. And so, I'm a lost cause, I think.
Well, let's go out there and let's do this again. I mean, if you find anyone out there who's got other perspectives, even if it's on the other side of the spectrum, let's get them on. I mean, we've got a platform.
Yeah, I know a few people that probably, they definitely share a lot of the points of view that we've had. Some of them are even more vocal than me about it, so they'd make for an entertaining hour at least. So yeah, I'll reach out to a couple of them and see if they want to jump on with us in the near future.
That'll be cool. Dan, always a pleasure. It's good to see you, sir, and I'm stoked to hear that, and obviously to see that you guys have, you've delivered on what you said you were going to deliver all those years ago. And best of luck, and let's carry on with this discussion.
Best ain't come yet. We're getting there. We're building up to the crescendo slowly but steadily. So you'll hear it when it comes. It's that.
I'm sure we will. Look forward to it.
Cool. Cheers, dude. Speak soon.
Take it easy.
All right. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please give us a like, subscribe, and turn the notification bell on for next time. See ya.